All right. Hello, Fortinas, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to Ministry Revealed. It is March 28th, 2026. Well, hold on tight. We are not out of it yet. This is going to be an exciting teaching. It was so exciting. I actually had to make a post in the forum late this morning to tell people to hold on tight because this is the most exciting, and I'm going to try to restrain myself a little bit in this one, because I tend to get excited. I love digging into these things. I love seeing the revelation of the Lord and how pieces and parts all come together. It's so crazy. It's so awesome. We know the year of the season and time we're in. 70 years coming to an end in the count from Jerusalem with Leviticus 19. We've got the count all the way from Christ, leaving us 14 years to the final Jubilee. I mean, it's so crazy. And on top of it all, since the end of, what is it, February or whatever it was, end of February, I think it was, we have this war going on with America and specifically Israel and Iran. This is not a tit for tat one. This is part of the revelation of the end of days. The only thing left now with this going on, as you guys know, is the pre-trib vanishing. It is the pre-trib vanishing, which will be followed almost simultaneously, I would say, by an attack from Iran on Haifa and Tel Aviv that will bring about devastating destruction. I don't know if it's going to be a tactical nuke. It's going to be something significant, though, that I would assume something along those lines. But you have to remember, tens of millions of people will have vanished at that same time. But is there going to be so much distraction? I mean, it's going to be craziness. But of course, that's what you get. It's the beginning of tribulation, right? It'll be the literal beginning of the end of days. And all of these things are happening right now. All of it right in this season. And I haven't been this excited about looking to a specific time as I was since the 11/9 to the New Year of Trees time frame. Okay? That was powerful. That was an exciting time. We understand this count. Well, we also know that we've done teachings from years ago. That was a massive revelation that we talked about in this last one, that we brought up again and brought some pieces into it, about this whole count of the 2 months off and being back as it was in the beginning, and in the time of Jacob and Moses and all these things, that the beginning was in Taurus, and we know it's a difference of 2 months now. And so we've brought this back to the table. Well, this is kind of a little jumping place as to where we're going to continue from here. Because what's going to look like just simply going another few days forward is going to bring a heck of a lot more into the picture. And if you've been following for the past little while, I would, if you've been following for the past several years, you're going to see connections in this that are going to go back to teachings we were doing 5-6 years ago. You're going to see the connections of the 4 months, right? Going 4 months early. You're going to see the 2 months we were talking about. You're going to see a connection to the true time of the Feast of Weeks with leavened bread. You're going to see that 50 days later is where wine is, and is the harvest time, but is going to be observed 4 months early as well. All of these things. Remember how we talked about the 8th day, the 8th day / 8th year, that prophetic picture in Luke chapter 9? We're going to briefly touch on that as well, without going too deep into it, because we just did a teaching on it not too long ago, and I'm going to point you to that teaching if you want to see it. But remember, remember in that count, we have to be in the 8th year, which in the big picture is the first year of the next set of 7, right? Which is the 7 years of seals from a sowing and reaping count, which we're in right now according to the count all the way from Christ, right? Which we're in according to the count of Israel coming into the land and having to be sowing and reaping in a new cycle starting when they came in 1948 in the fall, to the 70 years that we talked about a moment ago. All of these things and what they equal and their timing is connected to this one date we're going to talk about today. It's either directly pointed to it, or it is a count from it that directly connects back to it. And it's wild. You're really going to want to pay attention because this is kind of going to be laced throughout this teaching. You're going to want to watch all of it. I don't know how long it's going to be, but you're going to want to watch all of it because it's tied all the way through. And that is the 8th day as the 8th year from Luke 9. Remember? We need to be in the 8th year on a sowing and reaping, which we are, which means we have to be in the first year of the next cycle of sevens, which, as you know, we are. That's going to be tied in throughout all of this. And remember the prophetic picture of it from Deuteronomy 16? You will. You will. You'll remember what this means. And where it lands is exactly on the day. It's that crazy. Now, this is a day that was shared with me, give or take about a month and a half ago. And it had some very interesting connections, right? Things that we've taught on in the past. But it didn't sit right with me at the time. Number one, because of the explanation of the moon. Okay? So number one, when I first came across this, when this was shared with me, it was this connection with the moon that they were making that to me didn't make any sense. And at the time, we were still too far away that this would make any sense. But in the last couple of days, in fact, it was because of a teaching that was posted in the forum on Ministry Revealed. If you want to join us, ministryrevealed.com, go right here, click on the link, the menu, go to forum, and people from all over the world are there watching, praying, diligently seeking and searching, studying. It takes 5-10 seconds to sign up, and it's free. There was a post in there, I believe it's by our sister Crystal, or Crystal Clear is what she goes by in there, and it was a post from Jay McCarroll, a pastor who has great understanding of how things were back in the ancient days. And the way these things were in how they were understood by the people to who Jesus was talking to back then, how it all made sense. And he breaks these things down incredibly. But we've shared on him in the past. You know, he shows the one about the foolish and wise virgins, and he talks about all of that. And we showed, he thinks that's connected to the pre-trib. And we did a great teaching on that years ago, that it's not the pre-trib, obviously. He doesn't realize that he's talking to the post-trib. He even said 13 years and then one more year, the 14th year, and the final Hoopah wedding. And he thought it was the pre-trib. We know that that's the post-trib Hebrew wedding, right? That's the post-trib. Well, this was the same type of revelation that came from this in watching what he was talking about in this teaching that he did about Passover. And what Passover was actually being described like. And we talked about this, actually, I think we talked about this a few years ago as well, because our brother Roy had brought up in his studies that he had done and things when he went and go searched about it, that the Passover being described in the New Testament wasn't observed like the Passover in the Old Testament. Was it really a Passover? Well, it was a Passover. It was Passover. But the way it was observed clearly wasn't what they were told to do in the Old Testament. So what was it really a picture of? Well, you're going to see. And you're going to see him talk about it, not me, but an expert in this, in how they were laid out at the Passover meal, how it was all presented, and they were reclined. Some of you will remember this teaching. We did another one about reclining. All of these old teachings and recent ones and newer ones, all of these things. I said I'm going to try to contain myself a bit. All of these things are connected in this today. And they all point to the same day. Okay? So it was exciting as I went back to see the note that was shared with me about a month and a half, 2 months ago. But it goes now deeper because there's other people that are looking at this day too. Okay? Because for what it is at the time of Passover, everybody tends to look at the time of Passover. But there's a big difference for us, guys. You see, the difference is the breakdowns of the revelations that we have. You see, it's not just here's the date and it equals this because of that and that's it. No, remember all of the teachings. Remember everything that's been revealed around it over the years. And when you see how everything points from this and what it also adds to going forward and backward, it's craziness. I was so excited last night. as I was going through it, and I'd been working on it the last couple days, and then last night I was going into, I call it my, people like to say prayer closet. I don't know if you'd call it a prayer closet. I call it quote unquote my prayer closet. It's my laundry room. All right. It's the laundry room at the back of the house, right near the garage door. And that's where I close the doors, and it's just my quiet place. And I go in there for one of my prayers at night, and I'm there for about 15, 20 minutes. Last night, I was there for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I was pacing. I couldn't focus to get my prayers going because all of these things were just ripping and running through my brain. And it was connected to this. It was connected to the story of Jacob and his 7 years ending, right? And that, did you think he waited for a week, 2 weeks, a month after his 7 years were complete? I'll bet you he knew it to the exact day and said, "Give me my bride." Well, when you see how that connects, even though his was the Feast of Weeks, when you understand what it equals when you go back, it's the same date we're talking about. Okay. Reserved, sip of coffee. All right. So, needless to say, in all of this, in all of these things that we've counted, that we've seen over the years, this cherry on top that we're looking at is is built on the foundation of so many hundreds, maybe even thousands of this point, of revelations that have come in these past 8.5 years. It's awesome. It's so awesome. And the world is pointing to it in all of the actions it's taking. Hold on tight, guys. I believe like no other that it's around here somewhere, right? These events are happening. Are we supposed to believe that the whole thing with Iran, Israel, and America, this is going to go on for another year until we get to the January, February time again? I don't believe so. So I believe it's around here somewhere. And everything else around it has told us the same thing. 70 years, the sowing and the reaping counts, the counts from Christ, the final Jubilee year, all of it is telling us the same story. So that's why this is so much more exciting than simply coming and believing that it's just simply another teaching about the cherry on top, about the when of when it is. Okay? But it's not a thus saith the Lord. So please, this is why, as excited as I get, because I'm just in awe by this, by all of the revelation. Take it with a grain of salt to say, okay, it's still not a thus saith the Lord, but in everything connected, oh my goodness. If this doesn't keep you watching and praying and diligently seeking and searching, you're in the wrong place, because this is exciting. Okay? And if you're new to the ministry, I always talk about this. You didn't think I was going to skip this, did you? If you're new to the ministry, a lot of these things you're going to hear talk about 14 years and the differences within who the gospels are speaking to. And it's not going to make any sense to you unless you come to this playlist right here. Oh, sure, I know everybody wants what day is it going to be? When is the pre-trib? Well, if you're in Christ, ready, watching and praying, diligently seeking and searching, it won't really matter, will it? Because you'll be gone, right? Those who are in Christ, spirit-filled, it won't matter. They'll be gone. But there's also a group being prepared, right? We want to be ready, okay? But so if you're new, you're free to watch this, obviously. But I highly recommend coming to this intro series right here. You can go to the playlist, or you can go to ministryrevealed.com, go to the menu and click on intro. And when you do, it'll bring up this. There's 15 videos in this playlist. No, you don't have to spend your time watching all 15, but watch the first 4. This first one is a 22-minute intro on what you're going to begin to understand in the next 3. The second one is a 30-minute Bible study introduction to the differences of what we call who the Gospels are speaking to. Everybody's been told it's contradictions, right? By Muslims or by atheists, it's contradictions. So it can't be written by God, it's written by men. And the church has just justified it by saying perspective. This was just that perspective, this perspective, that perspective, but it doesn't justify the answers, because there are differences that can't just be perspective, because Jesus was in a different place. It was a different count. It was a different group of people. We reveal that the entire story, every single difference within the Gospels, and specifically within the Synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, every single one of those differences is prophecy. And we've been proving it out for 8.5 years in dozens and dozens and dozens of places, over and over everywhere. Okay? But then what does that mean? Well, then you're going to realize that what you thought was 7 years of the end of days, it's not 7 years. It's not all about the Gospel of Matthew, but it's about the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, which in the end becomes Luke, Mark, Matthew. The first will be last, the last will be first. In the end, it becomes Luke, Mark, Matthew, and the end of days isn't a period of 7 years. It is a period of 14 years in a short period of time called above. That above is the portion of the pre-trib and 50 days of events that take place before the red horse rider and the start of the 14 years. Yes, it's 14 years. That's why you have the differences within the synoptic gospels. When you realize that it's not all about Matthew, and that you're not to take a little bit from Mark to fill in Matthew gaps and a little bit less from Luke to try to fill in Matthew gaps, but they're all their own story, it's wild. And what you'll realize is you'll have questions like, how did we not know this before? Number one, it wasn't yet the timing. The Lord God had a timing for the revelation to come at the time of the end. Number two, it's all because of Matthew. For generation after generation, for hundreds of years, we've been taught foundationally from the Gospel of Matthew because it's the first gospel, right? It's the first gospel. So everybody gets taught from the Gospel of Matthew and looks to Mark and Luke to kind of fill in some gaps in the story of Matthew. When in reality, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and the end is Luke, Mark, Matthew. Do you know what it means? Pre, mid, post are all true. In the above in 14 years, pre, mid, and post are all true. But because we've all been taught from the Gospel of Matthew, everybody only sees 7 years. But they argue whether pre, mid, or post are true. Because when they go into the epistles and into the Old Testament, you can see shadows of all of those things. And they argue about it. And they try to figure out how can it be in 7 years. Well, the answer is not 7 years. It's a short period called above and then 14 years. But we've missed it because our foundation for generation after generation has been found in the Gospel of Matthew. Once you begin to see it and understand it, you will never see or understand or read Scripture the same again, especially when you have that what we call end time eyes, to be able to prophetically see the picture of the end and how it plays out. It changes everything. It's so awesome, and it's worth your time. And those were 3 short teachings and then 1 longer one about Matthew. But I promise you it's worth your time. But now we're going to get to the stuff everybody really wants, right? Now we're going to get to this day that everybody wants to know, that I'm prayerful that it is in the seasons and times of everything we've been looking at over the years, and what all has to have a connection. So many parts and pieces need to be connected that reveal to us this picture. And wouldn't you know it, it even goes back to 6 years ago. Even back 6 years ago, when that first revelation, that was my awe moment of revelation from the Holy Ghost with Jodel. Remember that? The whole story about Taurus and the ox and the connection to Taurus, which we were recently talking about, right? Again, it's all part of it. The whole thing is part of it. So, watch this. You see, in the previous teaching, some of the previous teaching we were talking about, remember in January, this is what we were looking for, right? We were looking to the 11th month on the Hebrew calendar, Shavat, and the 9th day, that whole 5/11, 9/11. I mean, it seems to be pretty darn wild considering other events that were surrounding it. But if you recall, when this time passed, we were then considering the Shavat, Tu B'Shavat, right? The New Year of Trees. So either this was going to be the pre-trib and then the coming of the Lord on the 8th day, or when that was passed, we were looking at this. Now, why did it switch from between here and to here? What was the possibility? It always goes back to the Feast of Weeks. Remember that? It always goes back to the Feast of Weeks. And we talked about this more than once, that in the book of Jubilees is the only place where we see the 3rd month, 15th day being the Feast of Weeks. So in the book of Jubilees, here's the 3rd month. He came by the well of oath. It's the story with Jacob. It was the 7th day of the 3rd month. Jacob was waiting whether he would decide to go or not go down, and he remained 7 more days. That's now 14 days of the 3rd month. And then what happens? He celebrated the harvest festival of first fruits with old grain. Okay? What is the harvest festival of first fruits with old grain? It's the Feast of Weeks. And here it has the Feast of Weeks as the 3rd month, 15th day. Okay? Now, it is, of course, an Apocrypha. It is the Book of Jubilees. So, is it really it? Well, that's the debate, right? It's either going to be that it was right here, right? Remember from that 8th day as the 7th Sabbath, and then the 50 days? Well, the other question is, okay, then maybe it's from here. You see? So these are things that we talked about. And so what ended up happening is when we came into later February, what were we looking at? You know, there's that question of the month off, which could have gone from the 25th to the 26th of February. And then what? Well, then everybody was looking for Purim. Purim has never made sense to me connected to the pre-trib, because Purim and the festival, remember there's 2 women in the New Testament, 2 books by women. One is Esther, one is Ruth. Ruth is the pre-trib. Esther is the post-trib bride. Okay? Never made sense to me that it was a pre-trib, but we're watching, right? So we were watching at that point. Well, if you recall now, here we are in March. And what were we looking for this past week that we were talking about in the last teaching? We were talking about this, the 26th into the 27th of March. Why? Why we were looking at this? Well, if we go back, what? 2 months, remember? There's our January 28th, 26th, 27th we were just talking about, that we had been looking at for like a year, pointing to that time, to the week after with the New Year of Trees. Well, what were we doing here in March? Why did we come to this? It was the revelation of, again, remember, 2 months off. 2 months off. 2 months off from what? Well, from where everything was in the beginning, right? Without going into every single detail of that again, because we just covered it, it's that everything went back to, what was it? In the beginning. In the beginning is what? The beginning is Taurus, right? The beginning means ox. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The ox head, it's Christ, the ox, Taurus. And we also went to, of course, Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12 was the ox, it was Taurus. This was all part of the revelation that came in that download, that prayer that was suddenly given and answered by Jodel, who had no idea when this happened on March 10th into the 11th of 2020. No idea. And you guys all know the story of that. It was the most freaked out thing I've received in a response of this type ever in my 8.5 years. It was absolutely unequivocally from the Spirit a confirmation of exactly what I prayed for. Well, since then, we've understood and talked about this connection to Taurus and how it was and how it should connect. But it's always been like, well, 2 months. I mean, how do we account for being 2 months off? Because we're not really 2 months off because of the precession of the equinoxes, right? The precession of the equinoxes has moved everything forward by 2 months, so that Nisan, or month 1, is no longer in the constellation of Taurus, but is in the constellation of Pisces. So it's Pisces, and then Ayar is Aries, and then Sivan is Taurus. So if that's the case, then how does this 2 months apply? Well, lo and behold, here we were looking at the 9th of Shavat from January, and then we just did this whole 1 month later with the 2 options, and now we came to the 2 months later, and we've done the first option. We've only got one option left, and that option is, the first day of Passover, or Passover and the first day of unleavened bread. Do you want to know why this is wild? Because this is essentially a continuation from the last teaching. This is the story of the second option, the final option in the 2 months early. And when you see where the 2 months early and observed 4 months early and all that, when you see where it equals the 50-day count, when you see what it means to be right here, which is the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th, remember this portion right here, only the evening of the 14th until the morning of the 15th, until sunrise of the 15th, this right here is the Passover. This is the Lord's Passover right here. But it's also called what? It's also the first day of unleavened bread, which is called the 15th. Okay? So it's half of the 14th, and the 15th is on the half of the 14th and half of the 15th. This is an evening to evening. And evening to evening counts happen for Sabbaths, for feasts, okay, for those types of things. But a regular day goes from sunrise to sunrise. Okay? So a regular day is sunrise to sunrise. Feasts and the festivals and Sabbaths and all these things with the Lord go from a sunset to a sunset. And unleavened bread, day 1, is the sunset of the 14th to the sunset of the 15th. And the first half of it, in the evening portion before sunrise, is the Passover itself. You're going to want to remember that. Okay? We've talked on it a number of times, and it is a very key thing in this revelation we're talking about tonight. It's this part right here. Do you know that we're in the years? Do you know that in the years, brothers and sisters, we're right here right now? We're like right here. We're in this portion right here in the days to years. Oh yeah, you remember that, right? Remember this? This is what we were talking about earlier. Excuse me. In Luke chapter 9, right? This very important piece of revelation in the Gospel of Luke. We're going to touch on more of Luke later, which gets really exciting in Luke chapter 9. But here in Luke chapter 9, you guys remember this? About in 8 days, that prophetically in the picture of years, right? It's days as years. We know that in prophecy, days can be as years, years can be as days. We've shown what this means. This one, only in Luke's, has a dual meaning, meaning it is about an 8th day when the Lord comes as the Son of Man, white horse rider, to begin the 40 days of the Son of Man after the pre-trib wedding. But it is also telling us that this is all going to occur in the 8th year as the days to years. And you'll recall these teachings we've done on this. We did this many years ago, and we've talked on it since, that it's interesting that Luke's has a double revelation to it, whereas Mark's after 6 days and Matthew's after 6 days simply refer to after 6 years with no connection of days also and years also, okay, in relation to prophecy. When we then went to the story of Genesis, in chapter 7 of Genesis, we see in verse 4, it said, for yet 7 days. And in verse 10, it says, and it came to pass after 7 days. Now, these two are the same 7 days. 7 days are about to start. 7 days have ended. Okay? But if you recall, when you go to Genesis chapter 8, and you see another 7 days mentioned and another 7 days mentioned, those two are not talking about the same. They're not being the same one repeated twice. They're simply being the next 7 that's coming next, and the next 7 that's coming after that, as the 7 years of seals, as the 7 years of trumpets. Only the first 7 is mentioned twice. And to me, I found that fascinating because of the revelation of what it meant that we already understood before having the revelation in the ark, in the story of the ark. We understood that this in Luke's transfiguration story, this is the picture of the Son of Man coming for 40 days as the white horse rider at about an 8th day, right? Sometime in that 8th day. But you recall, it wasn't very long ago when we did the teaching of how important it was that when we got the revelation of the dual calendars, it was the first time it equaled that the 8th year was also where this had to happen in. Meaning we had to be in the 8th year, which is the first year of the next set of 7. You guys will recall that. And it was so powerful because it was yet another thing. And it was such a wild detail of something we've known for years, but could never make the connection. Because you know what it's telling you? Do you know what it's telling you? It is telling you that we must be. It is a prophetic revelation that we must be in the first year of the next set of 7. You see, because the 8th is also the first of the next 7. Every single time. You can call this 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay? 1 is also 8. But we'll show this on this new chart that our sister Tammy did for me. So awesome that this is also the 8th, as you guys know, in the big picture, like Jacob's story. Okay? So we'll get to that in a bit. But you guys know that this is the 8th year. It's a 1, which is the next cycle. And we have to be in it. We have to be in it. This I think I was just as excited when I was talking about this in the teaching we did not too long ago on this. We have to be in this. Which means if it was the 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the other side, it wouldn't equal the time. Because we have to be in the first year. On the sowing and reaping side, we have to be in the first year, which is 8. The 8th year in the big picture. That was powerful. It was so important to understand. We remember this too, right? In John's gospel. In the Gospel of John, John has a chapters to years picture, right? So in the chapters to years picture, the Gospel of John, chapter 8 is the first year of the 14 years, right? And it just so happens that we read about it being early in the morning, okay? The whole story about being early in the morning, they came and sat with them and listened to them, and we have the description, this breakdown that we've talked about over the years, of this woman taken in adultery, which is like an adulteress, but it really means it was another expression as a Gentile. And what do we see this same wording? We see it in Luke 21, right after verse 36, which is the watch and pray to be accounted worthy to escape all these things and to stand before the Son of Man. We see he went out early in the morning to teach in the temple, and they all came to hear him. That's the same wording we get here. And then what happens? What happened? So first of all, we're in what? Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is a picture of what? The 8th year. We have to be in the 8th year. John's gospel, in the revelation that we showed in how it plays out, either as sowing and reaping years or as Nisan years, John's gospel plays out in sowing and reaping years. And here we are in the 8th year as in the 8th chapter. So the pre-trib, in this revelation, in this connection that we've talked about for many years in John 8, this picture of the pre-trib in the first part of John chapter 8 is in chapter 8 in the 8th year, which is the year that we're in right now. And what do we see comes next in verse 12? Then Jesus spake again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And why is that so important to us? Because we know that when the pre-trib wedding happens, you have all the events of the bride. We know that Haifa and Tel Aviv, the prophetic picture or typology of Zebulun and Naphtali, Iran will strike Haifa and Tel Aviv. And then what happens? That war it'll be something so devastating that's going to happen that will break out then for a week. At that point, a specific fighting that will begin for a week. And it must be so devastating to an extent because it's going to settle down quickly right after that week. And who shows up on the 8th day? Here comes the Son of Man. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Okay? Again, we've talked on these things. We understand these things. It's the 8th year as the 8th day in the chapter 8. It's where we have to be. But remember what I told you. What is the first year of the next set of 7? What is the first half of the first year of that next set of 7? It's a prophetic picture from Deuteronomy 16, right? Oh, don't worry. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. So, without going into all of this really deep, because we've already done it, and it's so fascinating when you understand it, you guys will see it right here. Okay? This was the one right here, the 8th year day. It was done about 3 months ago. So, December 6th, 2025. You want to understand more? You want to jump into it deeper? Go watch this one again, and you'll get what I'm talking about in relation to this 8th day, 8th year. Okay? But remember, from here, which would have been the fall of 2025, until the fall of 2032, which is the end of 7 years, what are these 7 years as 7 days a picture of? Hello. That's what all of this points to today. All of this points to. What are these 7 years a 7-day typology of? Well, of course, you remember from Deuteronomy 16. So what would this first half, which we're in, what would this first portion of that one be? Don't worry. We'll get there. We'll get there, because it's awesome. It's so wild. It's so much fun, right? Remember this? It's the story of the end of days. Deuteronomy chapter 16. You want to talk about another incredible revelation when this was shared? I can't recall. It was maybe a couple or so, 2-3 years ago now, when a brother first shared this and said there were 3 in Deuteronomy 16. I believe it was something that was shared with me in a comment. And when I went, my head exploded, because this was the confirmation that the end of days is revealed in the 3 feasts of the Lord, as you guys know. And even though it goes Passover, Feast of Weeks, and then Tabernacles, we know, just as Enoch, we know that the Feast of Weeks is coming first. The Feast of Weeks is going to be observed first. And what that means is those who are in Christ, spirit-filled, walked with God, as Enoch did, will be taken as Enoch was, never having tasted of death. You guys know this from Hebrews 11, from all these breakdowns we've done with it. We know that this is observed first. We've talked about this, how it's like a podium, right? So you have, if you're facing somebody and they're on the podium, like the Olympics we just had, you have the second place person on the left, you have the winner in the middle, and you have third place to the right. So you got second place, first place, third place. Which one's the first place? Just like the Feast of Weeks. It's funny how that works, right? The first place, the highest one, is the Feast of Weeks. The one in second place is like the one of Passover that's in the first position. And the one that's in third place is like the one in third place is Tabernacles. It lays out like podium positions, first, second, and third. And the entire breakdown of what we're talking about is how the Feast of Weeks is to be observed, as John said, as Jesus said in John 4 months early. The question is, where is the true Feast of Weeks? You see? And in years past, it's been more frustrating, because when we thought it was the year and it wasn't, we kept digging. And so here we are now, and we're like, well, this has to be, there is no 70. The count from Christ is here. They came in a year 0. They started sowing right away that year, a new cycle. There's no more 70 from that. There's a perfect count from Christ when he declared the Jubilee to the final Jubilee in 15 years from now. So how are we going to add more? This is why we're remaining so diligent at this time. And I'm not just hanging up the hat and saying, hey, you know what? We're going to hang up the hat on this diligent for the cherry on top. And we're just going to go back to just the specific diligently seeking and searching the Lord more within the scriptures, not related to the pre-trib, but just get more details of the incredible revelation we've been given. If need be, if the time comes and goes, of course we're going to continue to do that. And we'll try to do it and build up more ways to bring about the revelation and to share it with more people. I have a little bit of a plan working if this still isn't it. But when we see these things, when we understand what's happening, this there's a reason why I'm still being diligent. Because to me, it seems like, well, it would seem like it's too late at this point. No, it doesn't. Not when you continue to track what we're talking about, it doesn't. Not at all. In fact, where it lands is so incredible. I would dare say it couldn't even be more perfect. We have historical evidence of feasts and when they observe them taking place. We have a storyline of Passover being described as something that really isn't Passover-like, but something else. And it's all telling us the same date. So when we know the pre-trib happens, okay? When the pre-trib happens, which is the Feast of Weeks group going first, wherever the Feast of Weeks is, it's going to be observed 4 months early. Where this is so important. Wherever that true Feast of Weeks is, that is going to be observed 4 months early. Do you know that whatever that day equals would have to be the equivalent of being in the first year, right, of the 7 years of seals in this first portion, and this 7 years of seals is a picture of Passover, which is unleavened bread. What is the first half of the first day of unleavened bread, 7 days of Passover unleavened bread? What does this first half represent? You guessed it. It represents the Passover itself. The first 7 days, or the 7 days of Passover, which is unleavened bread, okay, they are the picture of the 7 years of seals, as you guys know. Okay? 7 days as 7 years. Remember the whole story we were talking about? Days as years, right? Well, here's the 7 days as 7 years. They're played out as 6. And then, of course, in the 7th year is the solemn assembly. In the 7th day is the solemn assembly, which in the 7th year is the mid-trib great multitude. And then you, of course, got the third place position, which is the 7 days of tabernacles, or the 7 years of tabernacles. And the solemn assembly doesn't take place in the 7th day, right? But it takes place on the 8th day. On the 8th day is the solemn assembly of the 7 days of tabernacles. It's the 8th day that's the solemn assembly. And it just so happens, as you guys know, that the 7th year of trumpet judgments, which is the 14th year of tribulation, the Lord will have returned at the beginning of it. It will be as it was in the days of Noah, which is 1 year and 10 days long. And when that 7th day or 7th year of tabernacles as years, which is the 14th year of tribulation, comes to an end, it's the 8th day when they are gathered back. And that 8th day when they're gathered back for the solemn assembly, it is the final Jubilee. Okay? We see in Mark's discourse, we talked about this earlier, right? Again, what is Mark's after 6 days telling us? Mark's after 6 days is, of course, telling us the coming of the Lord in Luke's discourse. This coming of the Lord in Luke's discourse, when he comes in the clouds, plural, he's coming at the day and hour no one knows. The day and hour no one knows when he's coming is the Feast of Trumpets. So when is the Lord coming? Right here, at the end of 6 years, as the 6 days of unleavened bread. He's coming at the end of the 6th, and the solemn assembly is in the 7th day, or in the 7th year is the mid-trib great multitude. But when is he coming in the clouds? He's coming after 6 days, after 6 years, and he's coming in the clouds, and it's going to be the day and hour no one knows. Okay? Now, Revelation 7, there's your mid-trib great multitude, which is, of course, the solemn assembly from the seventh day Passover as the 7th year of seals. What about the one in Matthew? Again, you guys know this. I'm building this up for you guys. In Matthew chapter 17, you have another after 6 days. These 6 days are, of course, the 6 years of trumpets, the first 6 years of trumpets after the 7 years of seals. And what do we know about it? It's the same thing. It's when the Lord comes at the feet down on the Mount of Olives at the 7th trumpet. When the Lord comes at the 7th trumpet, it's him returning feet down on the Mount of Olives. When he does, it's Matthew's discourse. Okay? We know this is when he's coming on the clouds of heaven. Remember, this word on, this word in the Strong's Concordance is actually the word on, whereas Mark and Luke, it's actually the word in. So this should actually be the word on. So this is when he's coming on the clouds, feet down on the Mount of Olives, with the sound of a great trumpet, which is the 7th trumpet. And when he comes, this is the end of 6 years, the start of the 7th year. So after 6 days, after 6 years, okay, is the beginning of the 7th year of trumpets. And when is he coming? On the day and hour no one knows. And that day and hour no one knows is right here in the fall of 2038, when he comes on the day and hour no one knows. And that final 7th year of trumpets, right, which is the 14th year of tribulation, is the 49th year of the 7 times 7 to Jubilee count. And it just so happens that in Matthew's discourse, only in Matthew's discourse did it say that it would be as it was in the days of Noah. And the days of Noah were 1 year and 10 days long. And what happens in the 49th year, 10 days later, on the Day of Atonement, is the sounding of the shofar of the Jubilee. Okay? So I wanted you to see and understand that's your about or after 6 days and after 6 days in Matthew and Mark, after 6 years and after 6 years. But when it comes to Luke's, it's 8 days. What does that have to do with anything? Why is it so different in these differences within the Gospels? This is how deep the revelation is. So if you're newer, you would say, oh, I never noticed that before. Matthew says after 6 days. Mark says after 6 days. But Luke says about in 8 days. So sometime around the 8th day. Well, that is different. How do you account for that? You see, that's what you're seeing here. This is the prophecy about it. This is the understanding. The revelation is days to years, years to days. This is the story of Deuteronomy chapter 16. These are the 7 years to 7 days of unleavened bread. These are the 7 days to 7 years of tabernacles, and the 8th day of tabernacles is the new beginning, the Jubilee. This is what you're seeing. But within all of this, the Feast of Weeks, which is generally the middle feast, is going to be observed before the first one. And the only thing that comes first, while being in the 8th, is this period of 50 days. There's a period of 50 days within this that begins with the pre-trib. So you have to have a 50-day count to something. It has to be a count that came back from 4 months where the wheat would have been, where the harvesting was, and bread being leavened. We have the revelation brought back to our understanding from the previous teaching of the 2 months early with it. And it all has to be in the time of spring. From a count that seems like late summer. How on earth can we get still in this? Right? How do we still end up in this if we're already at the time of Passover coming up? That's what's so awesome. Is that it's directly connected to Passover. I'm going to say it again, and I'll probably say it a few more times. We have to be in the 8th year. We have to be in the first portion of the 8th year. And if these 7 years are a picture of the 7 days of unleavened bread, which is the Passover. And the first portion of it begins as Passover. What are the chances that everything's connected to Passover? Even though it's the Feast of First Fruits of the Feast of Weeks of the wheat harvest being observed 4 months early, equaling this period that would equal in days Passover, that in the year count would bring us to Passover? What? Yep. Okay. Remember how this all equaled? Remember this? When we look back to how Passover is counted, this is what we were talking about a moment ago, right? We see that in Exodus chapter 12, a lot of good stuff in Exodus chapter 12, right? Where this is the beginning of your months, the beginning of your years, and what is it? It is, of course, when it was in Taurus, okay? We get the 14th and the breakdown and understanding of what the 14th being Passover is. And then what does it say? In verse 18, it says, in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening. Okay, so remember what we were talking about earlier? In the first day of the month, okay, on the 14th day, so the 14th day goes from sunrise to sunrise. It said in the evening. So you have the whole day, which is the 14th, from sunrise to sunrise. But Passover is the evening, you see? Because now we're talking about feasts. You see? We're talking about feasts. So it's not beginning at sunrise, it's beginning at sunset. So now the Lord's Passover is sunset to sunrise. Nothing is to be left by morning, it must be burnt. Okay? Passover is only the first half of the 7 days. So if we're looking at this as 7 years, this first half right here, which is Passover, is this first half we were looking at right here. It just so happens that this is the years, and the picture as Deuteronomy revealing days to years of the end of days as a perfect 100% picture in those feasts to the pictures of the end of days. And here we are at a period that we're looking at, which is right here, the first half of the first day of unleavened bread, which is the equivalent of the 8th day, the next set of 7 starting, being the 8th day. This would be the 8th day as the 8th year. And the first half of it would be this right here. And what is this day? Well, it's not only Passover, but it's also called the 15th, right? What? Yeah, it's called the 15th, if you recall. You see, in Exodus chapter 12, the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins at the evening of the 14th day. See, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. So you have unleavened bread, which begins on the 15th, but it's a feast, right? One of the feasts of the Lord. So it begins on the evening of the day before, which is the 14th. So there's day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What did it say? Until the evening of the 21st. There's your 7 days of unleavened bread. There's your prophetic picture of the 7 years of seals. And we have to be in the 8th, which is the first year right here. And we have to be in the first portion of it as the days to years of Deuteronomy. Okay, as the unleavened bread of Deuteronomy, which brings us to Passover. And what is this first day, brothers and sisters? Oh, you're going to want to hold on tight. Because, remember this? If this was a 4 months early, remember, if this was the prophetic, a type that could have been, if this was the other one that could have been, and this was the other one that could have been, this one was a 4 months early without 2 months off. This one was a 4 months early, but only in a 1 month off, which there was no connection for 1 month off. We were just diligently seeking until we then realized the story comes back about the 2 months off because of the count of Taurus being the beginning, as it was in the beginning, as it was in Exodus that we just saw in chapter 12 when it was Taurus. So what happens when we account for 2 months early? This has now come and gone. We're left with this. Wait, we're left with the Passover, which is the prophetic days as years, the first half of the 8th year. This equals 4 months early. The actual first half, this first half of the first day, which in the big picture is the 8th year, the first year of the next set of 7, right? Which in the sowing and reaping count years, we have to be in the first half, literally, as we've been teaching now for a while from Deuteronomy, is in the exact picture of this date right here. Okay? In the year's picture. Just so happens to equal 4 months early on the date that equals the year. So you're trying to tell me that Passover, the actual time of Passover, okay, that 14th, 15th time frame, this 8th day, this portion right here is Passover that's going to be connected to a wedding? Remember what I said earlier? Remember our whole story with our brother Roy over the years, saying that Passover wasn't really observed like a Passover according to what Scripture said to observe it like, but that it kind of seemed like there was some sort of party meal going on while they were reclining. Remember that back in the beginning? Reclining at a party meal. Oh, you're going to remember it. Reclining at a party meal. Yet, we're told it's Passover. And the date is equaling the what? The final option. One was directly on the Hebrew calendar count. One was a 1 month off count that didn't line up. And the other one is the final portion of the final option in the 2 month off from a count that goes back 6 years, which is the only revelation I've ever knowingly, a confirmation, I should say, from the Holy Ghost that I've knowingly, yes, through all the revelations, Scripture is revealed and proven out Scripture. But this is the only time in a prayer that I'm fully aware of that was fully answered that said what? Right on target. Remember that? Right on target. And give me a second here, okay? Right on target. I'm going to make a note of that. Okay? So, right on target. I was in tears when that happened. I was freaked out when that happened. And do you understand what I'm saying? It's the 8th year in the picture of years in the first half, and it equals the day, and all of this equals that day. What on earth is going on that every single one of those things is equaling that actual day? You know what I'm saying? It's all equaling it. And it's our final option. You see that? This was our second last option. And in the revelation of the 4 months early, this is the final option. And it's equaling Passover. It's actually equaling the evening, the first half. It's in the Passover. What? Watch this. Now, when we go to where do I want to go? When we go to Luke now, chapter 22, Remember what we were saying? The counting, okay? So we know that this is the Lord's Passover, which is the first half of the first day of unleavened bread, and this is the end of unleavened bread. When we went to Luke chapter 22, you guys remember this? It says, now the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. Okay? So we now know unequivocally this is the feast of unleavened bread, and it's also called the Passover because the Passover, which is the first half of the first day, which is the evening of the 14th, is also the first half of the first day of unleavened bread, and unleavened bread was what they had to eat there that night as well. Okay? And unleavened bread goes from that point unto the evening of the 21st. We know these are the 7 days as the 7 years of seals. We've taught on it for a while. We understand it. It's not even a question in the Revelation anymore. We know it. Okay? We've understood it. But what I'm getting at is that this is a build on top of that revelation, because this is the 8th year, right? And it's also the 4 months early. I'm just trying to make sure this sinks in for you. We have to be in the 8th. And I'm going to show it to you to make it more clear with the new chart we have. Okay? We know on the sowing and reaping side, we have to be in the 8th, which is the first year of the next set of 7. Or we could say in the big picture of 21 to 22 years, this is the 8th. We have to be in it. And not only are we now in it, but we're seeing that the 4 months early actually equals the 8th year. Let me just see if you're absorbing this. Remember what Luke said? Remember what we just shared in Luke? Where are you, Luke? Right? Remember what we just shared in this with Luke chapter 9? Luke's about in 8 days. Luke's about in 8 days. You can now add a third definition to that, a third picture to this story. It's the Son of Man is coming back on the 8th day. Yep. Right? That dual picture. It's the fact that it has to be in the 8th day, 8th year. But in the revelation of the end of it beginning, the 4 months early to the Feast of Weeks that would have to be observed in this 8th year as the picture of the first day of Passover, right? Of unleavened bread, days to years, the first half is equaling the day of 4 months early. What the heck is going on? Okay? Watch this. I think I have here the show new chart. So watch this new chart. Okay? This is so awesome. Tammy helped put this together for me. And I'm so grateful because she's so patient. Let me, just for fun, I'm going to show you guys how much fun this is. You have no idea how crimped my arm gets after doing this. I don't know a better way. I'm 53 years old. This stuff sucks for technology. I'm trying to learn little things along the way, but I try not to spend too much time in it. But watch my spelling with this. I'm using my little touchpad on my laptop, and I'm spelling to you the word picture. Okay? In a best scribbly but understandable way that I can, okay? Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, just ask Tammy. Just ask Tammy. This is the type of writing I give her on this after she does certain parts, and we need to get to, okay, now that's done, we can build to the next, and that's done, we could build to the next. And she designed this out of my chicken scratch like that. So kudos to our sister Tammy. I am so grateful, and I know many others are for this as well, because this I wanted her to build for this teaching. So this was getting done over the last couple days, and it's ready to go, which is perfect timing, because what you're seeing here is the Jubilee count of the end of days with unleavened bread in tabernacles days to years. Huh. That's what we were just talking about, right? So what you're going to see here, this was her idea. That's how brilliant she is. This was, I couldn't figure this one out. So what you're seeing here is one of these boxes, okay? And all I told her was that we can do it like this. This is an evening to evening. So let me show you what I'm talking about, okay? We're going from evening to evening. So that's like this, okay? So this first box, evening to evening, is like going from the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th. Straightforward, right? You can do this for the Passover week, and you can do this for the Passover unleavened bread week, right? You can also do this for Tabernacles week. It goes from evening to evening, the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th, which is the first day. So, watch this. There's your evening to evening. And this first box, which is empty here for a reason, you'll understand as we go through it. This first box is going to represent the 14 years count of the revelation of tribulation, okay? The middle box is going to represent our big pictures, okay? Remember that big picture we always talk about with Jacob and Leah and the 20 years and then the covenant made, right? It's that big picture count, the 7 easy years we say, okay? That count is going to go here. And then this final box is where the count of the numbers for the Jubilees go. Okay? So these are the Jubilee year counts. And what do you have? Again, evening to evening. Okay? So this would be from the evening of the 14th. Okay? From the evening of the 14th, if we were talking Passover or Tabernacles, the evening of the 14th, there's your sunrise, your middle of it. Okay? Which is your day. And then it goes to the sunset, the evening of the 15th. So from the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th. But what do we know this is called? Biblically, what is this called? It's the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th. But what do they call this? It's the 15th day. You see, they call this the 15th because the Feast of Unleavened Bread is from the 15th to the 21st. So half of it is the 14th, half of it is the 15th, but it's called the 15th. So you'll understand as we get further what I'm saying by that, because you're going to see a little bit more definition in these boxes. So evening to evening, daytime is in the middle, which means it's going to be half of one day, half of another day. Okay? Now, what are we seeing? Again, the Jubilee count. These are pictures of what? 7 years, and it's the first 7 years. This is the second 7 years. There's your third. There's your fourth. So the first 4 have nothing, right? Those are the first 4 years of a 7 times 7 years for a Jubilee count. And then where do we get to? Well, then we get to the 5th set of 7. And what are these? You notice how now they're yellow. Why is it yellow? Why is there a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Why are these middle boxes yellow? Well, let's go back up to the chart. The middle boxes are the 21 years, the big picture count. So that's why it's yellow. Remember, these are the 7 easy years from Jacob's story. He worked 7 years expecting to get Rachel, but got Leah. And so what you're seeing is there's the 8th. Okay, there's your 7 in the big picture, which means this is the 8th. We're going to get there in a moment, okay? And it goes to 14. This is the big picture. And then you got the 15 to 21. And then finally you have the 22nd year, excuse me, which is the Jubilee. Okay? And we know that this is the Jubilee in the big picture. 7 easy years of Jacob, 7 years of seals next, 7 years of trumpets, and then the 22nd year is the Jubilee. How is it the Jubilee? Well, look, you keep counting all of the numbers from the white at the beginning, you get to the Jubilee. Okay? The 50th. Now, what is the Jubilee? It's just like we've been teaching all these years. In the 14 years, which is like 7 days of 7 years of seals, 7 days of 7 years of trumpets, the 15th year is the 8th day of tabernacles. And it equals what? The Jubilee. In the big picture, the 22nd is the Jubilee. In taking it from Leviticus 25, 7 times 7, then you have the 50th, which is the Jubilee. And the reason we built out the rest of these boxes is so that everybody could see that the Jubilee is also the first year of the next set of 7 years. The Jubilee 50 is not a standalone year because sevens never, ever, ever, ever end. There is no just 50 year by itself and then start one. 50 is the first year of the next 49. Okay, so look at what we get to. We end up as the first of the next 7, which means we're right back up at this right here. Okay, so what you could say this is right here, you can also say this was a Jubilee. Okay, but we only do it down here. We don't want people confusing and thinking, why has he got Jubilee up there? Okay, but that's what it is. First year of the next set of 7. Okay, the first set of 7, the first year, is the Jubilee and the first year. These are all things we've been teaching now for a long time. Let's go back now to these first 7 easy years and watch these connections to it. What happened with Jacob? Jacob worked 7 years, right? So Jacob worked 7 years. Okay, watch this. Here's the 7 years Jacob works. He works 7 years. We call them quote unquote easy years. Okay, and I'll clarify this again in case there's new people. It's not to say that everybody's life for the last 7 years was easy. Compared to tribulation, they were easy years. Okay, compared to the coming end of days, these past 7 years were easy years. And with Jacob, the story is what? This is going to blow your mind. The story with Jacob is what? He had to work 7 years. He was so excited to work 7 years, he was going to work those 7 years expecting to get Rachel. Okay? Turns out he gets duped and he ends up getting Leah. Okay? And what does it say? In Genesis 29, verse 20, it says, "And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days." Okay? Because time flew by. He was so excited that they flew by. Now, let me ask you, when those 7 years ended, do you think, when those 7 easy years ended, do you think Jacob was like, give me I can wait a month. I can wait another couple weeks. Or do you think Jacob was so excited, he was so excited. You got to remember, he was expecting to get Rachel. He was so excited. Do you think for a moment he was going to wait more than the next day? Of course not. He wanted her as soon as his 7 years were done. In fact, that's what it says. I've completed my 7 years. Give me my bride so I can go into her. Right? Well, guess what? These 7 easy years, okay? Here's this picture of those easy 7 years. Watch what happens. Those easy 7 years ended, and then what do we get? What do we get? We find out, you guys remember this, we find out that the wedding takes place, and the story of the wedding is called Fulfill Her Week. The word week is the word Shabuah for Feast of Weeks. The word Shabuah is Feast of Weeks. There was no law given for the Feast of Weeks yet. Yet, here in Genesis 29:27, it's the first use of the word weeks for Feast of Weeks. Yet it didn't exist. Well, that's a clue, of course. You see, that is a clue. Well, do you know that back in Jacob's days, are you ready? Do you know that back in Jacob's days, the first month wasn't in Pisces? The first month wasn't in Aries. The first month was in Taurus. Right? Are you tracking with what I'm saying? Connected to the last teaching? In Jacob's day, Taurus, as we read with Moses in Genesis, in Exodus, Taurus was the beginning of the year. Do you remember what we did in the last teaching? If this was month 1 with Jacob, as it was with Moses, as it was in the beginning of everything, it was Taurus. What did we do? We counted from what would have been Passover, right? This would have been the literal time when they were fleeing right here, right? They ate the Passover meal, and really late at night, right here, this is when they were fleeing on the 15th day of the first month back in Moses' day. This would have been the same 15th day of the first month back in Jacob's day. Remember the account for 2 months off? Hello. When we did this count, right? So when we did this count, watch this. When we did this count, we ended right here. Okay, that would be the end of unleavened bread, right here, 7th day of unleavened bread. When we did this count in the previous teaching, we got to, of course, the 9th of Av. Right? We got to the 9th of Av. But, of course, that time, right, that is now come and gone from March 26, 27. Right? We're March 28th right now. So this time is gone. There's only one option left for the 2 months off, which is a revelation that began 6 years ago. And it's this right here. Well, if we say, okay, then maybe this isn't the 3rd month, 7th Sabbath right here. This isn't then the 7th Sabbath and the beginning of 50 days. That means if it's not, this is the end of the 7th Sabbath and this is the beginning of the 50 days, there's only one other option. This is the end of the 7th Sabbath and this is the beginning of the 50 days. You see what I'm saying? It's a continuation of what we did from January, February, right? And then from late February, March with the 1 month off to now the 2 months, late March to beginning of April. It went from on the Hebrew calendar to 1 month off that didn't really line up to 2 months off, and we're now at the final count. So what would this date be back in Jacob's day, back in Moses' day, back in the beginning? What would this date have been? Third month, 15th day. 3rd month, 15th day. Okay? 3rd month, 15th day. Remember? Sivan was month 1. Or Taurus was month 1, which is now Sivan. Tammuz, which is now month 4, was month 2. Av was month 3, which is now month 5. So, according to Jubilees, because no other book do we have a date for the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, except for the book of Jubilees. And it doesn't tell us that it's the 9th day of the 3rd month. It tells us it's the 15th day of the 3rd month. Okay? Now listen to why I'm building this up for you. Because if you'll recall, Jacob's 7 years that flew by ended, and when they ended, the wedding was connected to the Feast of Weeks. In Jacob's day, this would have been the Feast of Weeks, and according to the book of Jubilees, which is talking about Jacob, it's telling us that the 3rd month, 15th day, was the Feast of Weeks. And in Jacob's day, Taurus, now Sivan on the Hebrew calendar, was the first month. Tammuz was the second month, right? Now on the Hebrew calendar, the fourth month. And Av, which is now the fifth month, would have been in Jacob's day the third month. And the third month, 15th day, is the Feast of First Fruits of the wheat harvest. Remember what I said. When his 7 years ended, he was so excited that he said, "Give me my bride." Do you think he waited a week, 2 weeks, a month? Or was it that next day he got his bride? Maybe that later that evening he got his bride, and then they had their whole wedding and so forth, right? That following day. Okay? In fact, he got his bride that night. The following day was the wedding, right? That began the week wedding. When did Jacob's 7 years come to an end? At the Feast of Weeks. It tells us it was the Feast of Weeks. We've been talking about this for years, brothers and sisters, because he didn't end up getting Rachel, who was the younger. He ended up getting Leah, who was the older, which is the representation of, we've been teaching here, as the old grain. The old grain is Leah. He ends up getting Leah in his day, which would have been now our current 15th day of Av. The pre-trib bride of Christ is connected to the true Feast of Weeks. The true Feast of Weeks in Jacob's day was this day, but in the end of days, we're told, according to John chapter 4, when Christ was speaking to the disciples, that it would be observed 4 months early. So the Feast of Weeks, the true time of the Feast of Weeks in Jacob's day, to the story, when his 7 years came to an end, tells us to observe her week because it was Shabuah. It was the Feast of Weeks, the third month, 15th day, the time of old grain, where he was expecting to get the new young grain, but got the old grain, which is Leah, the first fruits, the older before the younger, was right here. Which is, you have to understand, it's directly connected to what? Enoch. Third month, 15th day. Enoch was taken at the Feast of Weeks. At the Feast of Weeks. Do you know what happens if you go back 4 months from the 15th? Remember, Feast of Weeks is a feast of the Lord. So it goes from the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th. This is, or was in those days, the Feast of Weeks, and it still equals, as I'm going to show you, it still equals and has for several hundreds and hundreds of years been the time of the observing of the Feast of Weeks. Of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, I should say, to be more specific. But do you know what happens if you go back 4 months from this specific date? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. What? 4. It equals the 8th day as the 8th year of unleavened bread, which the first half we have to be in, which is the Passover, is precisely 4 months early from true Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, when you're to come in and give 2 leavened loaves of bread. Oh, you want to see something else? Do you know what day this is on the Hebrew calendar? Which was the 15th day of the third month. Do you know what day this is on the Hebrew calendar today? Tu B'Av. the minor Jewish holiday, which is a holiday of what? It is the Jewish holiday of love. And what is it? In modern day Israel is celebrated as a holiday of love. It has been an auspicious day for weddings. An auspicious day for weddings on, brothers and sisters, listen carefully, on the day that equaled the third month, 15th day, as the feast of weeks of the first fruits of old grain for the wheat harvest, in Jacob's day, from Taurus being the beginning, which is equaled, as you've been following over the years, which is equal to the pre-trib bride of Christ on the third month, 15th day, as Leah, connected to the Feast of Weeks. But we know through the revelation, it will be observed 4 months early. And the day of the observing of the 4 months early is Passover, the first half. The first half in the days to years that we have to be in for the pre-trib to happen, which in the years is the first half of the 8th, in the days is the equivalent of Passover. What trip are we on? Did we just step into the twilight zone? Like, what is going on? How is this possible? How did we not see all of these connections before? Oh, we've seen 9th of Av. We've understood Tu B'Shavat. Tu B'Av, sorry. We've connected. We've talked about these things. Now we've got the 2 months off, 4 months early. You see, when I first was looking at this, I was like, but 4 months early, like they were saying. I'm like, what? It never made sense that it would be able to connect all the way back to here. And why would here make any sense unless the 2 months off was back in the picture? And now we have, since 6 years ago, which we didn't back then, have now, over the last 2 to 3 years, the revelation of the 4 months early. We know it's the story of Leah. We know that we're supposed to be connected to the third month, 15th day for the pre-trib. This, not only is this when he got Leah expecting Rachel, not only is this the Feast of Weeks at that time, it was for Noah as well. Sorry, for Enoch, well, Noah as well, but it was for Enoch as well. It was the same one we're looking for. It's the same one we're looking for. Third month, 15th day, 4 months early, equals the first half of the 8th day is the 8th year. It's craziness. You see, it's going to be observed before. It's supposed to be the middle, but it's going to be observed before. And it's observing before, it has to be in the first half of the 8th day, which is the first of the next 7. And it equals that date from 4 months early. It's bananas. It's bananas. It's crazy that this could equal that. I want to make sure that this part really sinks in too. Let alone what we were already talking about before this, about what this equaled. Having to be in the 8th day as the 8th year. But knowing in all of our teachings over the years that we've talked about Leah equaling the pre-trib, which is why the word weeks is there. That we know it's connected to Enoch, who was taken at the Feast of Weeks. Both of those are a pre-trib picture of the first fruits of the Feast of Weeks of the wheat harvest, which is the pre-trib bride of Christ. But it also has to come before. And in its coming before, the two merge to the same date. And in their merging to the same date, it's because of the revelation that brought us from the 2 months off that began 6 years ago. and it had to be 4 months early in the equivalent of where it would land. And in the day that it gives us, 4 months early, is the evening of the first day of the week of unleavened bread, which is the Passover, which in years equals where we have to be in the days to years. Like, I'm freaking out again. This is what I was going through last night. I was going through all of this in my mind last night, playing it out, and then I would come out of my prayer closet laundry room, and I would go make a note. My wife's gone for work this weekend, so I didn't have to worry about any of that. Just going back, and my dog was wondering what is going on. My dog would go rest. I'd come back 5 minutes later. I'd make a little note. My dog would come visit. I'd go back in there, close the door. My dog would go lie down again. 10 minutes later, I'd come back out, make another little note. My dog would come. I did it like 10 times, and my dog, he must have been just freaking out. What is going on? I was, even now, I'm like holding my head. I couldn't believe what was happening. Every place and every way and every form, everywhere we were connecting it to was equaling it. And it brought these teachings from 6 years ago. And dozens of teachings that we've done on different portions of Revelations the whole way through, from the 4 months early, starting from the 2 months off to the 4 months early, to the 8th day being the 8th year and having to be in it, equaling the day. It was craziness. It's so absolutely like, and there's more. Okay? So it's not just that. There's still more. You see, because the question then becomes, well, how can the pre-trib be pictured in the Passover? Right? How's the pre-trib get pictured in the Passover? Well, we'll get to that. I mentioned that a little while back too, right? But it's supposed to be the Passover. It's supposed to be a Passover meal. Why would it be like a party meal type reclining and not observed like a Passover? Oh, you mean like the actual way they were doing it in the New Testament at Passover? Don't take my word for it. I'm gonna break it down. I'm gonna show it to you in a brother who is an expert at breaking these things down. Okay? Well, now let me show you something else. Not only is this, or was it, the 15th day of the 3rd month, not only is this the holiday of love, which is the great time of marriages, which is directly equal to 4 months early and was the date that he got married to her. Not only was it all of this, but do you know that for the past several hundred years, this is actually the time these things have been observed as the Feast of First Fruits of the wheat harvest? This is going to bring up another teaching now, brothers and sisters. And for those of you who have been around for a while, you'll know it. Okay? You'll remember this one. Where am I? Right here. Remember this? Loafmas Day. Do you guys remember Loafmas Day? Watch this. Loafmas Day is a traditional and pagan festival celebrated on August 1st. Now, let me explain this to you. Here is, okay, the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest from 2 months off. Enoch, Leah with Jacob, the wedding, dressed in white, right? This is when they dress in white and they dance around, but it has to be observed 4 months early. Okay? Do you know that August 1st is the time when they observe what's called Loafmas Day? Now, what is Loafmas Day and why do they observe it on August 1st? Well, Loafmas Day marks the first grain harvest of the season. Originating in Anglo-Saxon, half-mass, you'll always get a different description when you refresh it. It invokes baking bread from the new crop and bringing it in for Thanksgiving of the harvest. Brothers and sisters, Loafmas Day is the day when they bring in bread baked with leaven from the first fruits of the wheat harvest. They've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds of years. But do you know why they settled on August 1st? For the same reason they don't observe Passover on the 14th day of the first month. Right? When does Passover get observed? Well, they call it Easter, right? So the church, the world, calls it Easter. I don't think it's tomorrow. I think it's Sunday, the April 5th. Okay? I don't, our family, not really. We don't observe it. We have family dinner, but we always have family dinner on Sundays. I think it's April 5th. Okay? My family in my house, we observe Passover, having lamb and so forth. Not perfectly done, but just we do it in an appreciative way, and we do that on the evening of the 14th of Nisan. Okay? But what the world of church has done, remember the whole story? Remember the whole breakdown of them of what the church did when they decided they weren't going to observe Passover on the 14th day of Nisan? Remember when they did that back in the 14ers? Remember what happened? The original 14ers, who were called 14ers because they stuck to Passover being the 14th day of the first month, regardless of what day of the week it fell on. And they were ostracized. And here, remember the whole breakdown? I told you this brings back every part and piece we've been breaking down for years. What ended up happening? Here we are, a group of people in the end of days, realizing the end of days is 14 years and not 7. And we, by chance, had been calling ourselves 14ers because of the 14 years, only to find out there was an original 14ers that were because of days, and we were the ones because of years. And here we are showing the Passover of days equaling the 7 of years. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So what happens is the exact same thing. The church said, well, we're going to make it easy for everybody, and we're going to stick it on whatever it was, the first Sunday that comes after that week. And so now you've got always Easter over here on a Sunday, instead of truly observing it on the day it should be observed on. So what happened is the church did the exact same thing. This is the third month, 15th day. This was the day that the wheat harvest, it is the day of the wheat harvest, is the feast of first fruits of the Feast of Weeks of the wheat harvest. When they bring it all in, right? Sometimes it could be late July, sometimes it could be early August, it could be Sunday to Saturday, somewhere in between. But what did the church do? They chose a date somewhere around the midst of it and stuck with that date and gave the world August 1st as their feast of first fruits of the wheat harvest, when they bring in baked loaves of bread, brothers and sisters. Okay? That's what's going on. They bring it in with baked bread. Okay? So when we go back to Exodus chapter 12, and we see it's the beginning of your months and the beginning of your years, we know that it's where it was from Taurus, and we get that count to the third month, 15th day right here. This is the Feast of First Fruits of the Feast of Weeks of the wheat harvest. And for hundreds of years, in our modern hundreds of years, I'm not talking only all the way back with Jacob and Moses and everybody else. In our modern days, for the past several hundred years, they've been observing this time celebrated here. So you could say it's generally, give or take from about here to here. Okay? It's generally in this range. They've decided on August 1st, but it moves just like what day of the week Passover would be. But they've given us an Easter specific date. This is the actual day. What is this day? It is the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest, and even in our modern day, and for the past several hundred years, in our quote unquote modern times, they've been observing it at this same time, which is a count from Taurus, which is 2 months off. And what they're doing is they're observing what? Exodus 34:22. And thou shalt observe the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. What are they doing? Do you remember what they were bringing in? They're bringing in 2 loaves of bread. You see, this is exactly what happens at the Feast of Weeks. Okay? Even unto the morrow, after the 7th Sabbath, shall you number 50 days. So you have your 7 Sabbaths. Okay? How did we get the 7 Sabbaths count? Remember, this was Passover back then. You either begin the count from here, or you begin the count from here, right? From either the Sabbath, this time in the midst of the week, or you begin the count from after the week of unleavened bread. The difference brings you, of course, as we said, is either going to bring you to this 8th to the 9th of Av, okay, or the end of the 7th Sabbath and your 9th of Av, or it's going to bring you to this time right here. That difference of a week. It's the difference of how it's counted. And that has been a debate. We've been going back and forth on these two for years. Well, the great news is this one's passed. The only one that's left is this. And the equivalent of what it is and what it equals is exactly what we're looking to understand. What happens when the 7 Sabbaths are over and on the next day you begin to count 50 days? Well, you start by bringing in a new meat offering, and you shall bring out of your habitations, listen to this, 2 wave loaves of 2/10 deals. They shall be of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven. They are the first fruits unto the Lord. And what are they doing on Loafmas Day, brothers and sisters? On Loafmas Day, they are bringing in the first fruits of the wheat harvest with baked loaves of bread. Do you remember we did teachings on this years ago? They're bringing in the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. And I'm not going to bring this up because it always resets. But we did this teaching about 3 to 4 years ago, and it's if you look, if you probably really can't see it, there's a bright picture kind of in the middle, and then to the left there's a dark picture. That one is I think it says how it all begins, and it's a picture of 2 loaves of bread. Okay, that's where I believe we were talking about this. We may have talked about it in teachings previous, but I'm sure it's in that one as well. And what we see and what we understood brought about more revelation as well. You see, because as Jacob's years are ending and we bring this forward, and look what happens, okay? So there's Jacob's. We know it's the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest. They're still observing it as that today. When we go back 4 months, because we have to go back 4 months, so it's going to be observed before everything, which is in the 8th day as the 8th year, we then find out that April 1st is the date that it equals this year. Do you know that April 1st, right? Remember this with April Fool's Day? You know that April Fool's Day, celebrated on April 1st, is a tradition of playing pranks and jokes which origins are likely unclear, but likely tied to the celebration of spring or shifts in the calendar. Common theories suggest it began in 16th century France when New Year's moved from April to January. From April to January. Do you guys remember those teachings? Remember why it was called Poisson d'Avril? So I grew up French Canadian. It was called Poisson d'Avril when I was in French school, and everybody else, calls it April Fools. Well, it began, the French would make fun of people over in Europe, all in the countryside, because when Rome, right through Gregorian, when he had changed the calendar from it being at the time of spring. So what they were doing is in the last week or so of March, they were celebrating, and the new year began in April. Okay? The new year began in April. And they then were being made fun of because they didn't yet know that these changes had happened, and people would stick these pictures of fishes on them and would do these pranks because they hadn't yet been aware that the new year had now been moved to January 1st. So we've even got it connected to being what? The start of the year. You see what's coming? You see how this is happening? All of this time frame in the 8th year, about the midst of it, the time of the year starting with Nisan, the beginning of the year. Every single part of all of this is connecting us back. It's all connecting us back to this pre-trib 14th day Nisan connection. Okay? All of it. Now, the next question is, and this is where we kind of bring it all together. We see how powerful all of this was. I'm gonna hesitate from reiterating it again. I'm just hoping I've reiterated enough that you guys are getting it, because what this has equaled and the things that it's equaled to get there and the form, all of it is craziness. From teachings from 6 years ago, 4, 5, 2, all throughout, are all culminating right here. While all of this stuff is going on around the world, and we're so close to this attack coming, this mystery attack, quote unquote mystery, that will come from Iran. How is it possible in all of this, though, that the Passover meal can also be a picture of the pre-trib wedding? Right? Remember this. We all know this one so well here in this ministry. The picture, the parable that Jesus was talking about in Luke chapter 14 is the pre-trib bride wedding picture. The one in Matthew is the post-trib, and in Matthew 25 is the picture of when he returns after the end of 14 years, when that final year and the place prepared and he returns, and it's that final Jewish picture wedding. Okay? So what do we remember about this? In Luke chapter 14, verse 7, starting in verse 7, let's read this out. Okay? We know this, we've taught on this for years, that this is the pre-trib wedding picture. And he put forth a parable to those which were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, saying unto them, when thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit not down. Remember this? We talk about this a lot, right? Sit not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him. Okay? We've taught on this and say it many times. Anybody in this ministry should know it, that if you're taking pre-trib and you're not remaining to work, if you're taking pre-trib, you do not go to sit in the best seats in the house when you're in the third heaven. Go sit in the lowest seats, okay? We've talked about this for years, so that you don't want to be in the third heaven, having gone to the pre-trib in the third heaven. You were so excited. You went to the best seats, only to find out that that seat was to be reserved for someone else. And then there's like shame a little bit, right? You're like, ugh. And you're being brought down, to a lower seat, while somebody else who was to be given more honor is brought to that seat. So you go to the lowest room, and if you're to be brought higher, the friend will come and get you and will bring you up to the seat you've been given for honor. That's what all this is talking about in this whole wedding picture, how it's going to be laid out, right? And it says, okay, sit not down, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him, and he that bade thee, and him come and say to thee, give this man place, and thou begin with shame to take the lowest room. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lowest room, And when he that bade him cometh, he may say unto thee, Friend, go up higher. Then thou shalt have worship in the presence of them that sit at meat with him. For whosoever shall exalt himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Now you're going to want to remember that. You're going to want to remember this story, because you also recall this parable of this wedding is only spoken like this in Luke's. Mark's has none. Matthew's is spoken of differently and clearly post-trib conversation. Remember what happens after this wedding, right? After this wedding is the parable of the great banquet, which, as you guys know, is the prophetic picture of the Lord coming back on the 8th day, when he's going to have a banquet meal with who? With those who will be putting their necks on the line and take part in the first resurrection, which is the resurrection of the just. But our focus is on this conversation of what this wedding banquet is laid out as. Okay? But what on earth does this have to do with Passover? Right? What does it have to do with the Passover? When we're back in Luke chapter 22, that the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover. And then the Lord has them go and prepare this place in the upper room, right? And they go and they prepare this place, and the Lord comes and they have this Passover meal. Well, many people, as I've said with our brother Roy as well, many people that have studied this have come to see that this really wasn't, they didn't really observe it as the laws said to observe Passover. If we go back to Exodus chapter 12, we can see it with our own eyes. Read it with our own eyes. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 11, it says, And thus shall you eat it, talking about the Passover meal, with your loins girded, with your shoes on your feet. You're going to want to remember that. With your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, you shall eat in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. Okay? This is the way they were told to eat the Lord's Passover. And wouldn't you know it? That's not the way it was. That's not the way it was when they were eating it in the upper room for the Passover meal. Remember what we're trying to figure out here. In everything that is equaling this specific portion of this day right here, in a picture of days, in a picture of years, in 4 months back, in 2 months early. Do you realize? Look at this. It's literally the 2 months. It's literally the 2 months difference. And it's literally the 4 months early. There's still more. There's still more. So everything is pointing to this right here. This whole day right here, but specifically this portion of that day, which is the first half, which is exactly that first portion we have to be in of the 8th year. Okay? But this is supposed to be a Passover meal. But the Passover meal isn't even observed in the New Testament, isn't even being described as a Passover meal, because this is not how they were eating it, right? This is not how they were eating it. So let's go and listen to this expert, Jay McCarl. Yes, he is an expert. He travels all over the world, not only breaking this down, but many other places, like I talked about in the beginning, that he did with the wedding story, and how he explained it was 13 years and then one more year, like she had to be 13 years old, and then one more year, and he goes to prepare a place, and then he comes back. I mean, it was such an awesome teaching. It was so awesome. But my favorite was at the end. And he's like, that's why I believe in the pre-trib rapture, because he doesn't understand the revelation of the Gospels. He doesn't understand the revelation of the 14 years. But what he is an expert on is the events of how they played out in ancient times. So that when Christ was there and these events were taking place, people weren't scratching their heads wondering what he meant, right? He maybe didn't explain the details of what everything was reflecting, but the events of the things that were happening weren't a mystery because this is how they did things. Okay? But to us, we don't do those things like that anymore. So we're trying to figure a lot of these things out. And that's where he's the expert in understanding these things. So what we're going to do is we're going to listen to some of these pieces that he's going to go into, and we're going to see if the Passover could possibly, in any shape, way, or form, the literal Passover, have any actual connection to the wedding. Luke's wedding. Hold on tight. It's so awesome. All right, let's start right here. Oh, wait, I've got it on fast. I'll go quarter speed, okay? So 1 1/4.
But see, only kings and queens ever ate at long or elevated tables or with chairs because everybody else, they ate on the floor. That was just the way it was. If you look under the table, you can see, especially off to your right here, everybody's still wearing their sandals. Folks, that is horrible manners. You never entered a house in that world, even to this day. You don't wear your shoes into people's homes. It's considered rude and actually against your great hospitality. So they're still wearing their sandals. Of course,
you see that? This is, again, so what he opens up by saying, which I didn't go into, we didn't need to, but this is just the Leonardo da Vinci painting, and he's explaining how it's all wrong. Okay? There's no way that the table was like this. We know that Passover is on the evening of the 14th, so it's not supposed to be sunny out. Okay? It's supposed to be dark. It's in the evening, and it was not one long table. They did not sit elevated like this, and they did not wear their shoes. Wait, according to Exodus, they were supposed to be wearing their shoes. Isn't that what it should be? Nope. You're going to see that even though this is the Passover meal, and he's going to break down precisely what this Passover meal looked like. I think we even might have shared on some of this several years ago, but we've never seen the connection to what we know now. Okay? So he's talking about the Passover meal and how it's being observed. And it did not look like this. And the opening statement here that I shared was that they would not have been wearing sandals either. And he explains why. Yet, why would he say that? Because at the Passover meal, it said that they were supposed to have their shoes on and be girded about, ready to go. But that's not how they were observing it, right? So now watch this. Let's go a little bit further.
in fact, it looked more like the next slide that Mark is putting up here. And that one, again, there it is right there. You say, that's it? Oh, that's the Last Supper? Yeah, that's what it looked like. What? Too simple. What's all these mats on the floor and all that? Well, here's the thing. This table that's right here is indicated in the scripture. Actually, it's over in Luke chapter 22, when Jesus tells Peter and John, go into the city. It's in the morning of the Last Supper.
You see this picture? Let me zoom it in a little bit more for you guys watching. This is what the table would have looked like. This isn't just a maybe. This is what the table looked like. Okay? And he's going to explain what this side means. He's going to explain what this backside here means. And then he's going to explain what this side over here means and what the representation of these seats are. Okay? It's awesome. But this is what it would have looked like. And he is the expert. He has done the research and diligence into these with great care and very specific. He knows exactly what this is, and he breaks down the meaning of these seats. Okay? So again, it's not the old Leonardo da Vinci painting. It's actually a U-shaped type of table. Okay? You're going to want to listen to this. It gets better and better and better. Let's start right here.
Circumstances and context requires it to be under the circumstances. It was a place for dining. There would have always been something like this table in it. This table has a name. It's called a triclinium. Three-sided, clinium, reclining table. It's a rich man's table. Nobody ate like that.
Did you hear that? He called it what? It's a triclinium. But do you know what do they have to do? There's no seats. It's not elevated. Do you know how they ate? They had to recline. What? They had to recline. Listen to that carefully. The only way to sit here is to recline, to be stretched out, your feet at the ends. Okay, your feet at the ends, and you're leaning on one side. He's going to explain and talk about some of this. They would only eat with their right hand, of course, because if you knew what they did with their left hand back then, yikes, that's why we shake hands with our right hand, right? It goes all the way from back then. Parts of the world still, there's reason for it, but we're not going to talk about that today, okay? So they're reclining here. Well, does that ring a bell to any of you guys? Does that bring back some teachings that we've done over the years? Of course it should, right? In Luke chapter 9, remember I told you earlier we'd be coming back to Luke chapter 9? Do you remember the teaching? Do you recall the teaching that we did about Luke chapter 9, Mark chapter 9, and Matthew chapter 17? Do you remember how in Luke's, the transfiguration doesn't start until verse 28, right? We see that there be some standing here which shall not taste of death till they see the kingdom of God. Right? That's the picture of the pre-trib. And then it's the Lord coming on the 8th day, right? This is him coming on the 8th day after the 7-day wedding, right? It's also him, as we said from the beginning, it's also a picture of him coming at about in the 8th year, which all of these things will take place in that 8th year, which is the first of the next 7 that we've been talking about this whole time. But if you recall, in the teaching that we did maybe 2 to 3 years ago now, I can't recall, do you know that everything before verse 28, so the prophetic picture of verse 1 through 27 is a picture of the pre-trib, of the wedding taking place in heaven, of the 7 days events, of the Lord anointing, you would say, the apostles, of the Lord who's then coming back and then is meeting with the disciples. Okay? But these first 27, we've talked about this as being a picture of events, of typologies of things that are taking place during the 7-day wedding. You'll recall that in Mark's, what we went and explained in Mark's is you saw right here in verse 9, in chapter 9, verse 1, it says, which shall not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God come with power. And what did this equal? This is the end of the 6th year of seals. They will have seen him come. So at the end of the 6th year of seals, we see the Lord coming and everybody hiding in the rocks and mountains and caves. Hide us from the wrath, from him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come. They will have seen him come with the kingdom of God. Okay? They will have seen the kingdom of God come with power. This is when he's coming with heavenly Mount Zion at the end of the 6th year of seals. It's all past tense. They will have seen him come before the pre-trib happens. Which is exactly what happens. Because the mid-trib doesn't happen after. Right? Doesn't happen right at the 6 days. It happens after, in the 7th year. Which is what? The 7th day of seals. Right? The 7th year of seals, which is the 7th day of unleavened bread, the solemn assembly, the mid-trib great multitude we talked about earlier. But what happens when you go to Matthew chapter 17? The way Matthew 17 and his transfiguration story is laid out, there is no verse before the verse that starts with after 6 days. After 6 days means the beginning of the 7th, which is when the Lord returns feet down on the Mount of Olives. And do you know why why it's written? We've told you guys before that it is all prophecy. The way the chapters are laid out, the way the verses are laid out, the differences in the Gospels, everything is prophetic, and most people haven't yet understood that all of these things, that the Holy Ghost was unequivocally working within these people, that gave definitions in the Strong's Concordance, that gave the way the chapters and years and the verses would be laid out. The Holy Spirit was leading them all, just as the Holy Spirit led the authors. We've proven it out. And this was another one. Do you know why Matthew has no words before it? Luke's represents the 7 days. We're going to get back to that. Mark's represented having seen him come before the events then happen for them. But in Matthew's, there is nothing except bang, the transfiguration story starts. And do you know why? Because immediately, which you find only in Matthew's discourse, immediately after the tribulation of those days, then they're going to see the Son of Man coming, feet down on the Mount of Olives. It is all purposely written and laid out within chapters and verses, telling us a prophetic story, a prophetic picture, if you can see it. But you need to understand the gospel differences and the 14 years before you can. Well, now we're coming back to what we're talking about, because he just said that they're reclining. He just said that they're reclining. And if you recall that teaching we did a couple or so years ago of this revelation of the transfiguration and why the chapters are laid out the way they are, you'll recall that in Luke chapter 9, before verse 28, I said it was all a picture of events that take place within the first 7 days before the Lord comes on the 8th day. Well, wouldn't you know it? He just said that the way they're laid out here is reclining. And he connected it, or will connect it. Oh no, he did connect it to Luke 22's Passover, and he's going to connect it to something said in Luke chapter 14. Oh yes, that's right. We're going to still go there. Okay? So let's see what this wording was and why I'm bringing this up now when he talks about reclining. And we now know that the first part of Luke chapter 9, before the 8th day, represents the 7 days of the wedding in the events taking place in the prophetic picture. And what do we see in Luke 9 verse 14? For they were about 5,000 men, and he said to his disciples, make them sit down. Look at this. To recline. Make them to sit down by 50s in a company. At what? Reclining, or reclination, which is reclining, at a party, at a meal. Reclining at a party, at a meal. And this word, see, sit down and eat, reclining at a table at a party for a meal. Yet, remember, we're still talking about Passover. Yet the Passover doesn't look like it was observed as a Passover, but it looks like it was observed as a type of celebration, event, wedding meal. This word for sit down, to recline at a party, at a meal, this word is only used 3 times. And wouldn't you know it, we taught on this too. It's only used 3 times. Do you know why it's used 3? Well, of course, the first 2 are connected to each other, right? Luke 9:14, this is where we are. It's that prophetic picture of being what? This is the prophetic picture of the 7-day wedding. This is before the transfiguration story begins in verse 28. And so here it is. Well, what are we saying it is? It's a prophetic picture of the wedding. Right? The wedding banquet. And wouldn't you know, Luke 14 verse 8 is all about the wedding. Not the wedding banquet, I should say, but the wedding feast. Okay? This is all about the being invited and sitting down, not in the highest room, at the wedding feast. So our prophetic picture of it being like a wedding and being reclined at this type of wedding, even though it seems like a Passover, is a reclining at a feast, at a wedding type picture during Passover, is directly connected to our wedding picture that we talk about in chapter 14. Do you know where else it is? You almost won't believe it. It's also connected to Luke 24 verse 30. Do you know why it's connected to Luke 24, verse 30? Watch this. You guys know that Luke 24, if you've been around for a while, you know that Luke 24 is a picture of the Lord when he comes as the Son of Man, right? When he comes as that 8th day, as the transfiguration, that about an 8th day, sometime in that 8th day. Okay? And when he comes, we know this is the first watch group, right? This is the Smyrna group, the remnant group, the Luke group chosen to remain, a group being prepared to serve the Lord as little lambs, little light, little rocks, that will go out during the tribulation of seals, that will be with them during the 40 days. However, he told them to be ready when he returns from the wedding, that when he returns, he will have a meal with them. And you guys recall, that's from Luke chapter 12, verse 35, 36, and so forth, right? But only in Luke chapter 24, verse 30, it's the only chapter of Luke, Mark, and Matthew, of the 3 different groups, it's the only one that he sits down and has a meal with them and breaks bread and gives it to them. He sits down with them and has a meal and serves them. That's what he said he would do to the first watch group. That is happening only in Luke 24:30. Well, did you see it? Did you see it? 26:25. Where was the third time it was used? Right here. As he sat at meat with them, as he sat at this table, as he sat at this place at the table in a reclining position, he sits down to eat with them. Now you say, wait a second, this isn't the wedding though. This is after the wedding. So how could this word be getting used here as well as him having this meal in an upper room in a reclining type thing? We're talking about Passover, but now you're talking about when he comes on the 8th day after Passover, that it's happening again. Do you know why? Because it is. Let's go to chapter 14 again. Oh my goodness, I told you, man, I'm getting so excited. I'm so fired up because I don't know if you're getting all the new revelations that are coming. Because remember, this is where it was. There's the first one, right? So this is the one connected to Luke chapter 9. But then there's the one in Luke chapter 24, which isn't the wedding, but which is the 8th day when he returns from the wedding. Well, do you know that just as we have shown over the years and just explained that he only sits with and has a meal with and serves the Luke group, who is that first watch group, it's also the only one, which is Luke 14:12. Luke's is the only one where this great banquet takes place. There is no great banquet in Mark, and there is no great banquet in Matthew after Matthew's wedding story. This is the banquet that takes place after the 7th day of the wedding. This is a picture of the Lord returning on the 8th day. And what's he doing? He said he would come and sit and serve with them and have a meal with them. And so to see this word of reclining being used by the Lord when he comes and has a meal with them on the 8th day is directly connected to when he comes on the 8th day and has the banquet meal with this remnant group of workers. And their position is the same type of position which is being reclined at a banquet meal at a wedding. It's the same reclining, the same chilled out, reclined, having fun, enjoying each other's company as they were at the wedding. He's now having with them at this banquet. And it's only found in the Gospel of Luke. This story, all of this about the reclining. All of it about the reclining. So our focus, though, isn't on this one, but this one is just another wild piece of additional revelation, another great piece of additional revelation. Why would there also be another one in Luke 24? Because Luke 24 is the only time connected to Luke, not in any other gospel, where he then has the banquet with the remnant. And they're going to still be reclining and enjoying themselves in his company at that banquet. But our focus is this one right here. This prophetic type of a wedding picture banquets, sitting down in companies of 50 at a wedding type. And this is the picture of the pre-trib wedding. And in the Luke, Mark, Matthew difference, we taught on this just 2 to 3 years ago. We know that it's the revelation of the way the chapters are laid out. And he just finished telling us that the way they sit is the reclining at the table while it's actually at a Passover. Is there more to it, or is it just it's they're reclined in a Passover way where they shouldn't have shoes, but you see? And we know, by the way, you're going to find out as we go through this, we know they didn't have shoes. Remember what happened? Remember what happened in this story? Jesus ended up washing their feet. Hello. They didn't have their sandals on. They weren't taking all their sandals off. They were already off. Which means they didn't have their staff in their hands. They weren't girded about, and they didn't have their sandals on. Nothing to how it was being described as a Passover, yet it was an observation of the Passover meal. But was it only a picture of the Passover meal? Or are you starting to see the picture of being invited to a wedding? What are the chances you think he's going to start talking about that? Probably pretty good, right? Probably pretty good. Let's keep going a little bit further. Okay, let's go to 9:35. We're going to see this. We'll just play this part real quickly. But again, he's going to talk about reclining right here, okay?
Why? Because you're going to be on the floor when you eat around such a table. In fact, I have to show you how you actually ate around a table. Now, I gotta do my acrobatics here, but how do you eat at this table? Like this. Really simple. You see, you have usually pads, mats of some sort, maybe a pillow that goes all the way around the perimeter of the table. If you're really, really poor, you might have palm fronds to lay on, just something to keep you off the ground. Because
so now you're getting this idea of how they were laying. The way he was lying down, the way they would lie down here on their side like that, that is the reclining. And it's only found in Luke. It's only found in Luke. These such key pieces, guys. Let's go a little bit further.
Right hand. But so I'm reclining at the table. Now, there's another little thing that I need to go back into a little bit later on. But the table's here, my feet are out here, away from the food, because in that part of the world, as it is in about 3/4 of the world to this day, the filthiest part of the human body was your feet, and the bottom of your feet especially.
All right.
Now,
so that's pretty wild. If you guys want to go watch, we're not going to go, we still got more to go, but I'm not going to go into the later part of it where he talks about the worst seat in the house. We're going to talk about some of that, but not get into the part where it's about the washing of the feet, okay? Because the foot washer sat in the worst seat, okay? The lowest seat, the lowest position. We're going to show some of that. Where this lowest seat was, what this lowest seat represented. We know who was in that lowest seat based on Scripture, and he'll talk about it. And that person in the lowest seat is supposed to be the foot washer. But Jesus washed everybody's feet. The greatest coming down, nobody washed the feet of the foot washer. Nobody ever did. It was the lowest of the low. And yet Christ, the greatest of the great, came and served even the lowest of the low. And that was the message he was showing them in going out and being lower, right? You're all fighting to get the best seat. You want the lowest seat. Hold on. You want the lowest seat. You don't want to be running around everybody jockeying to get the best seat. Who's the greatest? You want the lowest seat. The lowest seat is the one who's going to serve everybody else, even the lowest of the low, which is the foot washer. There was nobody lower, he explains. There was nobody lower in society than a foot washer for a job. And Christ washed everybody's feet. And ends up saying that it's the lowest seat that is the greatest. Are you starting to see a connection? I'll bet you are. Well, it gets better because he's going to tie this together for us even better, okay? He's going to help you see that and understand it, explain it a little bit deeper for you.
Popular to this day. That's the triclinium table. This is the way you would actually recline at the table. And that's what the Last Supper actually looked like. Now, here's the thing. The disciples come into the room. They immediately start arguing about where they're going to sit. And the argument goes on. It even carries on later into the evening, and I'll tell you how in just a minute. But there is a pecking order around a triclinium table. That was another tradition attached to it. A pecking order? Yeah. See, here's how it worked. When you look at this U, the U faced the door, which was that direction. That's important. I'm going to get to that detail in just a minute. But the U faced the door, and on this wing of the table, right here in front of you, when you walked into the U on the left-hand side, those were VIP seats. Everybody wanted to sit right there. If you sat here, you were important. You were a VIP. You ever notice how the disciples had this ongoing argument about who was going to be the greatest?
Okay. So you're going to see, and I'm going to explain this in a moment. What he's pointing to is kind of hard to see because essentially, from the audience perspective, he's standing in the middle. So when he's pointing this way, he's pointing to this side, and then there's this side, and then there's this side. So what he's talking about with the VIP seats are these spots right here. These seats are the VIP seats, okay? So this is what we were talking about a moment ago. They were arguing, debating who's gonna sit, who is the greatest, so that they could sit in these upper seats, right? Remember what they were saying? That one wanted to be on his left and one wanted to be on his right. Remember those stories in Scripture? Well, listen to what happens. The highest, and then what about the next ones? I'm going to go to that here, and then I'll explain which ones they are.
Well, this is the VIP wing of the table. When the disciples argued about who was the greatest, they wanted to...
So this is the VIP wing of the table where they all wanted to say, you know, who is the greatest, like he just said. This was the VIP side.
Sit here when Jesus came into his kingdom. That was the essence of their argument. Now, this back wing of the table here, you might be important if you were there.
Okay.
You might...
Now he's talking about this back part right here. This back wing right here is for the kind of in between. You might be important, you might not be so important, but that's where that next group would be.
Not be important if you were there. Now, just be aware that you would say, well, that's where Jesus always sits, right there. Yes, in medieval paintings, in art.
Everybody depicts Jesus sitting right in the middle because it's even on the left side, even on the right side. Everybody likes to depict Jesus in the middle. But that is not where Jesus was sitting, okay? This is for just, you know, maybe important, maybe not important people, right? Different levels, different ratings, but they would sit on this side.
In people that didn't know anything about triclinium tables or the traditions attached to them, you would always put Jesus in the center position, which would put him in the third cot right there. But he didn't sit there. He sat someplace else. And it tells a story, which we will get to in a minute. And that's, again, you might be important, you might not, but that back row, back there, when you come into the table on the right-hand side, anybody that sat there, scum of the earth.
So this back row over here is called the scum of the earth row. And he's going to explain that this far one, so let me zoom in. So there's the honored guest, the highly esteemed. This is just maybe some esteemed, maybe not so much. This is, he calls scum of the earth. This is the lowest. These are the crap seats. And this one on the end right here is the crappiest, lowest seat of them all.
Nobody in their right mind would ever want to sit deliberately at that back edge of the table. That's where the people who are either the youngest or the least worthy actually sat. And it gets even worse, which I'll also have to explain as we move into this. That's a triclinium table. That's the essence of Jesus' disciples' arguments. This is what the Last Supper looked like. But wait, what did it really look like? Well, knowing what you know.
I love how he just went into breaking it to the wording he just said. Because the wording he just used is powerful, right? So this is what a Passover meal was laid out like. But was it? Knowing what you now know? Listen to what comes next.
That the Last Supper was at a table like this, and that you reclined at such a table like this, and knowing the rule that this is the VIP wing of the table, maybe VIPs, maybe not, scum of the earth over there. Oh, can I stop for a second? I got to tell you a story. Jesus told his disciples this. You got to picture this table.
Ding, ding, ding.
That when Jesus told his disciples this, listen, whenever you're invited to a wedding feast.
Sound familiar?
Wedding feasts would have these triclinium tables to very special occasion, right? Whenever you're invited to a wedding feast, Jesus said, do not sit down at the best seats, lest the host who invited you come with someone more important and say to you, friend, what are you doing there? Give place to this man. And with shame and honor were everything in that part of the world, and in those days and today in the Middle East too. Shame is the worst thing that can happen to you. And with shame, you get up from your honored seat and you take your place at the lowest seat, way over there. Instead, Jesus said, sit down at the lowest seats. Way to go, scum of the earth people. Sit down at the lowest seats so that the host could come to you there and say, friend, what are you doing there? Move up higher. And with great honor, and no doubt walking slowly so everyone can see where you're going, you take your place at the highest seat. Therefore, he who exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. It was all about dinner reservations. It was all about where you sat at the table. And they understood this. Can you picture it now? I didn't just tell the story and add this in. That's precisely what Jesus was talking about.
Did you hear that, brothers and sisters? At the Passover meal, he was referring them to the story and how they were sitting about not wanting to be in the position of the greatest, but to sit themselves in the lowest, and that if they were to be honored, they would be brought up. And here they were arguing about who was the greatest while at the Passover meal. And the Passover meal itself was a story of the pre-trib wedding, was a story of the Luke 14 wedding. The story of sitting down in the lowest room. Don't go sit in the highest part and end up not supposed to be there and being brought down here, but go sit in the lowest room and be brought to the highest if that's to be your position. And it happened during the Passover meal. Do you understand now what I'm talking about? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Is it connecting in everything that I just explained? Is it sinking into the revelation of what this specific day of all of it has pointed to? That 2 months early or 2 months off because of the calendars brings us right here. That 4 months before the Feast of Weeks of the first fruits of the wheat harvest brings us right here. Do you know that not only does it equal that, and not only in the Deuteronomy story picture does it equal the first half of the 7 days of unleavened bread, that first day, that Passover first day portion, which means in the big picture we're what? In the 8th year, that we have to be in the 8th year, right? We have to be in this first half, this first portion of the 8th year, and the day as the year, which is unleavened bread. All of it equals this, only to then find out that the Passover picture in Luke that he was talking about and them reclining is connected to Luke in the wedding days that we've showed in the prophetic picture of Luke 9 compared to Mark's, compared to Matthew's. And they recline at the banquet meal. They recline at the Passover, which was a picture also of the banquet meal, of the wedding meal, I should say, not the banquet, but the wedding feast. He literally described the way they were sitting and jockeying for position to the exact same day of the Passover as the wedding. Oh, is that it? Oh, wait, maybe there's one more piece. Let me add a little bit more to this story. Because again, this will be something else that if you've been around for a while, as I bring this to a close, you'll remember this in teachings from a few years back as well. Not only is the 4 months early the whole Feast of Weeks connection from the calendar and the 2 months off from the calendar, but you'll recall that when we taught on this, in the past in talking about Loafmas Day, which is really a specific day to when it should be observed, just as the Passover and the 14ers, days as years, craziness. Okay? But what else do we know? Remember the story about wine? Do you remember the teachings from years ago about the wine harvest when the grapes are ready? Okay? If this is the 4 months early to the Feast of Weeks, remember what that meant, right? It was a count from the Feast of Weeks. It was a count from the 3rd month, as Taurus was the beginning. And we count 7 Sabbaths from the end of Passover. And we get to the true Feast of Weeks, 3rd month, 15th day, from a Taurus count. Okay? And we go back 4 months, and we get to this time in Passover. Okay? But that is what? That is the end of the 7th Sabbath. Okay? Which means what? There's your Sabbath, 13th to the 14th. Ta-da! Isn't that what we taught? Isn't that exactly what we were showing in the previous teachings about the understanding and the revelation of Passover? And this begins what? There's your pre-trib. Pre-trib, that the whole wedding feast taking place. Okay, there's your pre-trib. Well, what comes next? The Pentecost, right? There's still the 50 days. So there was the 7 Sabbaths, right? We counted from after Passover. So from right here, then we begin the 7 Sabbaths. When we get the 7 Sabbaths, we get to the 7th Sabbath and the beginning of the 50 days. So if this is the beginning of the 50 days, then from right here, pre-trib, 50 days begin. Where do the 50 days then take us? Wouldn't you guess? Just like where the Jews have their count, brothers and sisters. Isn't that interesting? Right to where the Jews have their count, bringing it to the end of 50 days, and this would be what? The beginning of the 14 years. In Taurus. A count that started in Taurus, went back 4 months, counted from the 2 months being off, and brings us back to the beginning being in Taurus. What is happening? What is happening? Do you realize that this 50 days ending, this 50 days comes to an end, and the 14 years begin, right? After that 50 days is over. What is this 50 days? This 50 days is going to be the Acts 2.0. What is the church? What does the church call this time? Right? The Jews call it Feast of Weeks because they're only counting 50 days. And what does the church call it? They call it Pentecost. It's not really, right? This is the wrong 7 Sabbaths. This is their 50-day count. But it's actually going to be the 50-day count of Pentecost of our Acts 2.0 that we've been talking about for years, equaling the church's Acts 2, or the church's Pentecost. But do you want to know something? We, of course, know this isn't in reality where it is, because there's no such thing as a grape harvest in May. It doesn't exist. So what if this isn't really where it is? Where is the actual grape harvest? Well, if the pre-trib had to be moved up 4 months from true Feast of Weeks and had to be moved up 4 months, and there's a 50-day count to Pentecost of Acts 2.0 that comes after the 7 Sabbaths and then the beginning of 50 days from the pre-trib, when we do the count and we get to here, then guess what? That means that the count for the 50 days to Pentecost has also been moved up by 4 months. Because we know there's no such thing as wine being harvest time in May. But you want to see when it is? If we go back 4 months, or we go forward 4 months, we're from Sivan, okay? We get to Tammuz. We get to Av. We get to Elul. 4 months would be Tishri, right here. 5th, 6th of Tishri, okay? This would be the 4 months that the feast of Pentecost, at the time of Pentecost, at the time of new wine, when the grapes are ready to be harvested. This is the time of new wine right here. Do you remember how we talked about that years ago? Do you remember in the revelation of this conversation that we had about the Loafmas Day years ago, and this connection to it being the time of actual wheat harvest, even over the last 100 years, when they bring in loaves of bread with wheat, that we discovered that if you go 50 days later, you end up right around the time of Tishri, which is what? The actual time of the new grape harvest. Did you know that? If you haven't been around for a while, you may not have seen that from older teachings. Check this out. When is the grape harvest ready? Grapes are generally ready for harvest from late summer to early fall, August through November. Some will say August through October. Did you see that? August through October. So in the midst is September. Not only in the midst, but from August to October is exactly this year, in the middle of it. Okay? So not only is the grape harvest ready to harvest right smack dab at this point right here, let me show you this. The largest wine festival in the world is why is it showing me that one? Is this one right here. Some of our brothers and sisters from Germany would know this. It's this one right here, the Wurstermark. So what happened was, it's been around since about the, 1417. This has been around for hundreds of years. And it is the wine festival, the time of the gathering of wine coming together. Okay? They've been observing this since 1417, but they changed the name to this one, having to do, I think, with sausages, because in around 1800 and something like that, they started to introduce sausages as well, right? Those Frankfurters and all that stuff. So they changed the name. But the feast itself, the festival, I should say, itself, is a wine festival. Okay? It's the traditional tents and wine festival that's going on. It is, I believe, the largest one in the world, and it's observed in September. The 11th to the 15th and the 18th to the 21st. The 11th to the 15th and the 18th to the 21st. Our date of 4 months later is smack dab in the middle of it, in the midst of the late August to early October, middle of September, which is the feast harvest, the grape harvest, I should say, which is the time of the grapes ready for harvest. And exactly 4 months early brings us to where the church, after all of these decades, has just gone along with saying Shavuot is the Feast of Weeks, which is Pentecost at the end of 50 days. Do you see how everything is connected? 2 months off to the last day, to the third month, 15th day, from the 2 months off, which is from the count of Taurus, brings us back 4 months, not only to the pre-trib, connected to the 8th year as the 8th day, as the new set of 7 begins, but that 50 days later brings us 4 months forward from where the actual wine harvest would be, because it's going to have to also be observed 4 months early for the anointing of the Acts 2.0. And when it does, it brings us all the way back into the month of Taurus. And that, brothers and sisters, the story of the Passover meal is the story of Luke's wedding banquet from Luke chapter 14. The actual story that we have been teaching for years is the pre-trib Gentile bride of Christ wedding story, wedding feast. He has just told us in his expert understanding of how it plays out, that the Passover meal was being played out as a wedding feast. And this day, brothers and sisters, this date in 2026 is April 1st, the evening of April 1st, 2026. It's the literal day that everything has pointed to, and in the counts that it has pointed to, has reflected the counts of events where things take place. Oh my word. This is the end of the road as far as I know, as far as I understand. I'm qualifying it. Listen carefully. As far as I understand, this right here, depending which part of the world you're in, this right here is all I have left to understand. And man, do we ever have understanding connected to it. This is all I've got left in 2026. After that, I don't know. If you've been following for a while, you've seen this. You've seen all of these parts that I've talked about before. You've watched them, you've understood them, you've seen these connections. And it just so happens now, in this piecing of it all together, they equal this, which equals this. That's craziness. The Passover meal evening itself is the first half and equals the date of the pre-trib 4 months early on a 2-month off calendar on a day that used to be the beginning of the year. What is going on? It's crazy. It's so crazy. And so this is what you're seeing here. I'll finish off with this. There's your 7 easy years that we talked about with Jacob and Leah. When his 7 years were over, it was over at what? The Feast of Weeks, right? Which the pre-trib, like I said, is supposed to be the Feast of Weeks. But the Lord said it would be observed first. So it's observed first, which is 4 months early, which brings us to what? Right here. The 8th day, which is the 8th year, the first year of seals, right? The next 7 years. These are the 7 years of seals, okay? These are the 7 years of seals. And this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years of seals. But they're also as the 7 days of unleavened bread. Which brings us to what? The 14th day. This is the 14th day of Nisan. This is the evening of the 14th day. Right? Remember, it goes from evening to evening. From the 14th to the 14th evening to the 15th evening, like we showed you on the calendar earlier. It's supposed to happen right in here, which is 4 months early, and to Jacob with Leah and Rachel, which is the Feast of Weeks, which for us is going to be observed 4 months early in our connection to Leah as the Feast of Weeks. 4 months early brings us to the beginning, brings us to this 8th year, and it's April 1st, which was a beginning of the year. It's like he took it and he slid where it was, which is the middle of the year, slid it all the way forward by 4 months and brought it to the 14th day, the evening equaling Passover, which is a picture of the wedding, of how they played it out, and said, boom, that's the beginning. It's craziness. You see, it is the 7 years of seals as the 7 days of unleavened bread that go from the evening of the 14th, as this right here, this portion here is the Passover, and from the evening of the 14th to the evening of the 21st are the days of the week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it's also the 7th year of seals and the mid-trib great multitude. Then what do you got? Then you have your final 7 years, which is the final to the 49 years of the Jubilee count. You have the first box. Remember, the first box is the 14 years. This is the big picture box, which brings us to 22. This first box is the 7 of seals, then 8 through 14, which is the 7 of trumpets, and then the 15th, which is the Jubilee. And what are the 7 years of trumpets as? They're as the 7 days of tabernacles. So you've got the same thing. This is what I was talking about in the beginning, right? The evening of the 14th to the evening of the 15th. From the evening of the 15th to the evening of the 16th. It's the same picture, the same setup for the 7 years of tabernacles and trumpets as it is for unleavened bread and the 7 years of seals. With one difference is in the midst of the 7th year of seals, the 7th day of unleavened bread, is the solemn assembly and the mid-trib great multitude. In the 7 years of trumpets to the 7 days of tabernacles, the Lord is returning feet down on the Mount of Olives at the start of the 14th year, right? At this start of this final day to years right here. And it's going to be as it was in the days of Noah, where he brings judgment against all of his enemies. That'll be the 49th year of the cycle of 7 times 7. And when this final year is over, it's 1 year and 10 days long. And what happens? The Jubilee is sounded 10 days later. From Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets, 10 days later, it is sounded on the Day of Atonement. Do you follow why? Do you see how this is all played out? How this is laid out? You can now see the 7 times 7. You could see the 7 easy years, the 7 years of seals, the 7 years of trumpets. You could see them as unleavened bread and as tabernacles, and how they play out in their days as the years. Brothers and sisters, it's an incredibly exciting time. I don't even recall. I mean, I've been excited, obviously, in teachings in the past, because we have had so many mind-blowing teachings, so many incredible revelations, hundreds of them. But the biggest part in all of this for me, which is what I was telling you guys from the beginning, which is what I said you would want to watch this all the way through for, was to see that everything was connected to being in the 8th year. That we have to be in the 8th year, which is the first year of the next set of 7. And that we know that these 7 years are a picture of the 7 days of unleavened bread. We've taught on all of these things. And it just so happened that the incredible honest of all of this in this revelation is that everything brought us to the first half of the first day of the 7 days of unleavened bread, which is the equivalent in years of the first half of the 8th year, which is the first of the next set of 7. And from that revelation, and seeing that it equaled that in days as it did to years, the 2 months off, the 4 months early, the Passover that it actually is as the date, is also told to us to be a picture of how they were observing the Passover as the wedding meal. I have never, in all of our years, throughout all of these revelations, had an understanding of this precise connection of not only the days to years, but the days equaling the years. From in the beginning to the end. In the year that has to equal the end of 70. That has to be in the 8th year. In account from Israel when they came into the land, that had to be a new cycle of 7 when they came in. That equaled account from Christ when he declared the Jubilee in 30 AD in Luke chapter 4. In counting the Jubilee, which is the 50th year and also is the first year of the next set of 49, the next year of the next set of 49, when we did this, we haven't changed any of it. it brings us to the final Jubilee in the fall of 2039 to the fall of 2040. And all of it begins in the 8th year as the day 2 years of Passover. Good luck sleeping tonight, because this excitement has 1, 2, 3, about 4 or so days left to go. Brothers and sisters, oh my goodness, I hope and pray. I hope and pray like there is no tomorrow that we have finally understood it. Excuse me, that we are finally truly here. That this is that day that isn't supposed to catch us unawares. That as a snare, it'll catch all of those who dwell on the face of the earth unaware. But that, as Luke 21:36 says, we watch and pray always, that we may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. Or, brothers and sisters, that we would be accounted worthy to serve the Lord when he returns on the 8th day and has that banquet meal with his remnant to serve him as he is. Brothers and sisters, I love you. God bless you. God bless your families. And I believe the next time we talk, we may just be in his presence face to face. I love you. God bless you. Bye for now.